6 months into the game, it's quite clear that Kill Team is really meant to be played with the bespoke teams. That is mighty fine, but I will give you 2 reasons as why you really want Compendium teams to stay relevant, even if you have no plans to ever play them again. The first is, of course, to catch new players who, for one reason or another, don't want to get the bespoke team. The second is perhaps less obvious. I believe that worse teams can actually help maintain a healthier game. But more on that in a moment. Let's first approach the adapter use, because that is essentially what it is. It's a module that lets you bring a multitude of 40k units and flavors into Kill Team, and this should not be underestimated. A living game is dependent on a healthy base of players. The starter box is awesome, especially if you're 2 new players starting it together. Actually, if anything should be in the core book, it's probably not the Compendium. It's those simplified Orc and Vet Guard teams. But however well done it is, all available entrances are assets. Right off the bat, I can think of 3 examples where the Compendium lowers the bar of entrance. The first is of course for existing 40k players who already got all the required models and just want to play a Kill Team. The second is when such a 40k player is really into, let's say ranged gun nuns and don't want to play them as a melee team. And third, let's say someone saw Tyranids and really want to get stuck into the grim darkness just to play those. Kill Team lets you do that in 1 or 2 boxes. These are just examples to show that there's actually a reason to keep the Compendium alive and healthy. Now let's move on to what I believe characterize a healthy Compendium. First off, if 2 new players play a game, it should never be an auto win just because one of them decided to bring a bespoke team. I believe this is reasonably true today. If anything, there's nothing wrong if the Compendium team is a bit meatier and simple to play, and therefore would give a slight advantage to the Compendium player. Repeated use of bolted discipline on a squad of tactical marines should never be the meta winner, but it should always be a reliable way to at least keep a relevant team into round 4. As the skill of the player rise, there should be more potential available in the bespoke teams. It's not a failure if the Compendium teams only occasionally make it into the top cut of some major tournament, as long as this dominance is directly related to player skill. While if you have a tournament for all new players, the winner could probably be a Compendium team. It might be a bit weird that the balance should be adjusted to the bespoke teams when the Compendium teams came first, and hopefully, more on that in a minute, was used for playtest. But the game is meant for bespoke teams, and in this meat-ploy balance, it's easier to adjust the meat. It could probably be kept with relatively simple means, such as buffing wounds and adding the occasional vanilla operative. In conclusion here, the Compendium does not have to be competitive to remain relevant. And that vanilla operative also brings us to the second part, how worse teams can make a better game. I was glad to hear that the Vet Guard was a winner in that recent large Las Vegas tournament. It is 10 dudes with las guns and 8 wounds each. It's clearly not the meat that won the game. It was correct use of ploys and synergy, just as I wish it to be. But I see both trouble and opportunity brewing on the horizon. The Wormblade White Dwarf bespoke team introduced the use of characters. That in itself is rather awesome, and I really like the idea. The potential trouble is that I see that it's always easier to lose yourself in all the cool stuff the characters can do. There will be demand for more, and the inflation takes off. In the end, you have a rock, paper, scissors game of which commander to bring. because the rest of the operatives are just there to justify still calling it Kill Team. This might seem like an overly pessimistic view of the future, and the Wormblade characters seem to live within reasonable bounds, but it did help me sort out one major risk. The risk that the entire game is dependent on too few things, perhaps even one. If all that would matter is the commander, the game is dead the second he or she is. This suddenly made me realize that the limited customization of the Compendium teams that I myself remember cursing at early on, it actually has a value. The further you are able to customize your team, the more a full value optimized team will drift from the vanilla team. And the more specific it will be, the more specific and greater its weaknesses will be. Not only does the all plasma type of team match poorly with any kind of floor, you'll never see an SAS team running with only, sniper rifles just because they happen to have the highest DPS. It also quickly brings you down the rock, paper, scissors pot. Plasma beats tanky boys, who beats the drones, who beat the plasma boys, and so on. If you are instead forced to construct or maintain a game that is at least enjoyable with only relatively basic operatives, you have to construct it so that the basic concepts like movement and action economy are the ones that make the game. Kill Team is meant to be played with ploys and shenanigans, but it still needs a healthy core. And a good way to measure this would be to play a game with something like Tactical Marines versus Imperial Guardsmen, and ask yourself, is it still a valid game? I believe it is. This basic core is actually the hard stuff in game design. And with the right core, any fool can come up with new cool moves for a fancy character. Hopefully without even breaking the game. I usually dislike when there are references to something other than the subject at hand, but I cannot help to make comparisons to X-Wing by Fantasy Flight Games, because it's a game I've played and I certainly like. Where, if you choose to fly the ships of the Empire, you have the option to bring Darth Vader. While he certainly sports a rather attractive value to points ratio, he's by no means an auto-take. In the hands of a skilled player, he can shred through teams on par with the movies, but if not used correctly, he's only slightly better than your average basic TIE fighter, of which you can get 3 for the same points. And as a new player, you will have a much more reliable result with those. I can even recall one of my own games, where I used him to chase down one single ship worth something like a third of his points, just to realize that due to his current placement, I was no longer able to bring him back into the fight before the game was ended. In fact, even skilled players in major tournaments often bring entire teams of no-named pilots. But enough of that sidestep. Let's conclude. My first belief is that the Compendium teams should be kept relevant by being the hard to fail, hard to shine teams. The second is that those Compendium teams can be used to validate that the core of the game is still in a healthy state. I probably missed something, and someone probably disagrees. Put it down in the comments. I would actually love to see both. And as always, don't forget to enjoy your hobby.